Episode 32, Luigi vs. Roy. Luigi stood at the prow of an airship, looking out at the endless sand dunes in front of him. A million stars shone in the clear sky above as a warm wind blew past him, waving at his hair tucked neatly underneath his green cap. His fists were gripped tightly as he stood looking at the horizon, waiting. A fleet of hundreds of airships was behind him, flying in stiff formation. They were the same models the Koopa Troop had used during Luigi's adventuring days, but they had been decorated with new colors to show their allegiance. The wood was painting a dark crimson, and instead of the Bowser figurehead, there was a golden fire flower. The flag of Fire Flower blew proudly in the wind as the fleet continued its way into the Sand Kingdom. The operation to defeat Roy Koopa was underway.
"Everything all right there, Luigi?"
came the voice of Koopaner from behind him. Luigi turned to see the blue-shelled shady Koopa glancing up at him.
"Why? Yeah,"
he replied.
"Don't worry, I'm ready to do this."
A tremor of nervousness passed through Luigi's body. This was his first real fight since his return. A fight against a Koopa who was no longer a teenager and who had had all of these years to train himself to perfection. What could he, a deadbeat former plumber, do against him? Luigi looked away from Koopaner and back at the approaching horizon. As impossible as it might seem, he had to try. Luigi could imagine the faces of Mario, Princess Peach, Daisy, and everyone else he had lost looking down at him from the stars as the fleet continued on its course. He could not fail them or the Mushroom Kingdom. He was going to defeat Roy Koopa here, if it was the last thing he'd do.
"We're approaching Neon City,"
came the voice of a toad from the crow's nest, both excited and frantic all at once. Luigi took a few steps forward and strained his eyes. There was a bright light approaching, one which became clearer the closer they got. It was a brilliant city rising out of the sands, skyscrapers shining with multicolored light that lit up the surrounding dunes like a disco ball. So this was where Roy had spent all his time after taking over the Mushroom World.
"Load Bill Blasters!"
Koopaner barked.
"Yes, sir."
All the Fire Flower members on the deck saluted. Luigi leapt forward until he was standing on the very tip of the ship's prow. The wind blew at his face as the multicolored towers approached, gigantic billboards displaying Roy's face. The Koopaling's face was less round now, much more like Bowser's, although he was still wearing his signature sunglasses. Luigi braced himself. The conflict had begun.
"Prince Roy! Prince Roy!"
The startled voice roused Roy from his sleep on his throne. The Koopaling blinked his eyes. There was a single green-shelled Koopa standing in his throne room. The tables where his loyal courtiers sat were empty and the dark purple lights cast strange shadows on the wall.
"Prince Roy!"
the Koopa called again.
"What?"
Roy hissed.
It's Fire Flower!"
the Koopa exclaimed. Roy's eyes immediately flashed open as he straightened himself on his throne. Fire Flower? Of all the times.
"How many?"
he instantly asked.
"An entire fleet, Your Highness,"
the Koopa replied nervously.
"Hundreds of ships."
Roy roared with anger, crushing the armrests of his throne as he gripped them. How could they have known? This was the least defended Neon City had been for years. All of his forces were out fighting in the war. There was no way he was going to let them trash his beautiful Neon City, which he had spent years building up. There was absolutely no way he was going to let Ludwig and Larry laugh at him.
"Get every ship into the air!"
he shouted, leaping from his dais and splintering the ground before him, causing the Koopa to leap away in fright. Roy looked down at the cowering minion before him.
I want them to regret this,
he said, grinning cruelly.
Show 'em that Roy Koopa is no guy to mess with.
The Fire Flower fleet flew over Neon City, the well-lit streets like a patchwork of lights beneath Luigi. There, looming ahead of him in the horizon, was a huge fortress, with a giant purple dome covered in spikes. Lights shone from it, stretching into the sky. Luigi's eyes narrowed as he looked at the enormous castle. Well, there it was. Roy's castle. He must be gotten through hundreds of castles belonging to the Koopaling in the past. This was just one more. The last one. Luigi reached down and took his hammer. The huge mallet fit perfectly in his hand. Luigi gave it a few experimental swings. The hammer was a gift from Yoshi, an authentic Beanish Hammerhead Bros Ultra Hammer. In other words, the very best. Luigi gripped the hammer tightly as they continued their flight towards the castle. It was time. There were small flashes of light as bullet bills fired from turrets placed on the roofs of buildings. Their red eyes shining menacingly, the bullet bills streaked to Luigi's airship. Luigi closed his eyes. 20 years since he had done this. 20 years. But once learned, physical talents seldom disappeared. He swung his hammer with one hand, colliding with a bullet bill and sending it flying into the sky with the force of a baseball bat. Luigi opened his eyes, smacking away a second one before deflecting two more with a wide sweep of his hammer. The mallet worked as an extension of his arm, smacking away the bullet bills and deflecting them back at their cannons. The smell of the smoke was in Luigi's nostrils as another bullet bill streaked towards him, only to be batted away as if it was only a fly. There was a larger flash, and, slowly spinning, a huge bonsai bill was launched in the airship's direction, trailing fire behind it. Luigi instantly knew this one couldn't be dealt with by hammer.
It's a Luigi time!
He exclaimed, leaping from the airship deck. As he flew through the open space above the streets of Neon City, Luigi felt as if he had become one with his younger self and was once again fighting with Mario by his side. His feet crashed against the bonsai bill's hard metal with such force it completely knocked out the missile. No sooner had his feet touched the bonsai bill's surface, Luigi had vaulted into a backwards somersault, spinning through the air back onto the airship. His body moved as if by itself, with no direction required. All of his fighting skills were still there. He hadn't lost them.
Amazing!
A Toad exclaimed from the deck of the ship.
The stories. They were all true.
Luigi smiled shyly and turned to the Toad, flashing a thumbs up. He was these people's hero, their light in the darkness. It was his duty not to let them down.
We've got 3 Koopa battleships in the air.
A Fireflower-aligned Koopa reported, running over to Koopanger.
And a squad of air troops coming right at us.
Koopanger nodded.
Prepare to fire!
He shouted at his troops.
I'll handle Roy,
Luigi said, glancing back at the Koopa.
You got it.
Koopanger nodded.
We can take care of those ships.
Luigi turned away from Koopanger, before leaping onto the ship's prow. He began to run down it, picking up speed, until he leapt through the air, landing on the head of a paratroopa. Luigi leapt from Paragoomba to paratroopa, trusting in his own skills. He'd done this many times before. He wasn't going to fall. Luigi bounced off a Paragoomba, launching himself into the air. Behind him, the Fireflower fleet fired, sending bullet bills streaking towards the enemy turrets and blowing them up. Luigi landed on a paratroopa, forcing it into its green shell, before balancing himself on the shell as it fell towards the ground at an incredibly high speed. Luigi grabbed onto his cap as the shell fell to the ground like a meteor, the neon lights of the city flashing past him. Below him, he could see hundreds of Koopa Troop soldiers running from the castle gates at him. Luigi stretched out his arms to balance on the shell, still holding his hammer. The shell hit the ground. The green shell skidded down the street, kicking up sparks as Luigi tilted its body to control it. Roy's castle was directly in front of him. All he had to do was get down this street. Luigi smacked into the first group of Koopa Troopas, scattering them. He shell-surfed in a zigzag, dodging a flurry of hammers from a dozen hammer bros, knocking down Koopa after Koopa. A Paragoomba tried dive-bombing him, only for Luigi to hit its skull with a solid whack from the hammer. Up ahead of him, a tank rumbled forward, firing bullet bills from its 3 cannons. Luigi leapt into the air, abandoning the shell but using his momentum to soar over the tank just as the bullet bills smashed into the ground, blowing up the street in an explosion of flame. Luigi's feet hit the ground and he began to run. He swung his hammer left and right, whacking every Koopa who tried to get near him. His eyes were focused on the massive purple dome of the castle in front of him. He was so close. Luigi brought his hammer down hard on a Koopa troll, knocking the armored Koopa out cold. A gang of Koopas spun in their shells towards him, only for Luigi to clear them in a single jump. As his feet hit the asphalt he leapt up again, and then a third time, going into a triple jump. It was almost as if Luigi flew over the remaining Koopa troops. They watched with expressions of awe and terror as the green plumber soared over their heads, holding his hammer high. Luigi was done hiding. It was time for the Koopas to learn that he was back. Luigi reached the steps leading up to the castle gate. 8 spikes positioned at the top of the staircase hurled their spike balls, the destructive spheres bouncing down the hard stone stairs towards Luigi. Luigi leapt up, passing over the spike balls and going into a spin, knocking the spikes away as he spun like a tornado before leaping towards the massive wooden doors. Carrying the momentum of his spin into his blow, Luigi put every once at his strength into a blow against the door. The sound of the crash echoed through Neon City. Cracks appeared on the massive wooden gates before, suddenly, they exploded into tiny pieces. The entrance of Neon Castle loomed before Luigi, black and ominous. Luigi entered the castle, walking down a long, dimly lit hallway lined with statues of Roy. The sounds of explosions echoed outside. Luigi left the entrance hall into another hall with purple and black checkered flooring and a large staircase. The entire castle seemed to be lit by dim purple lights, and it seemed strangely deserted. That had to be due to Neon City being underdefended, Luigi thought. It was why they were attacking it on this day, after all. Luigi reached the top of the staircase, and still saw nobody. The angry visage of Roy seemed to glare at him from the many pictures of the burly Koopaling that lined the halls. Luigi crept through the castle, his footsteps echoing around him. He felt extremely tense, all alone in the dark, quiet fortress. Luigi's heart beat in his chest. As he walked through the empty halls, he thought back to Toad Town and Cobal and everyone who was counting on him. The Mushroom Kingdom, so long oppressed, was finally starting to regain hope. The defeat of Roy, one of the Empire's most tyrannical leaders, would be a sign to the entire world that freedom was on its way to being restored. Luigi glanced up. He was in a tall, gloomy hall held up by large pillars. At the end of the hall was a huge purple door. If he knew the Koopa family, this was it. Luigi took a deep breath. He gripped his hammer, his hands sweaty underneath his gloves. Then he walked towards the door. The room he entered into was another large hall, this one full of empty tables. A long, purple carpet ran down the center of the room towards a tall dais lit by pink lights. Seated upon a throne there was a massive, muscular Koopa, purple sunglasses upon his face.
Luigi!
Roy exclaimed as Luigi, sweat dripping from his body, ran down the carpet until he stood before the throne.
Roy!
Luigi said, glancing up as he saw his enemy for the first time in ages. Roy Koopa had grown. He was the same size as Bowser now. Probably even bigger. His hands were large enough to grab the plumber around the waist, and his scaly skin bulged with muscle. Roy began to walk down from the dais. With every step of his feet, the room shook.
You know,
Roy chuckled.
when my minions told me you were the one leading this attack, at first I was mad.
Luigi looked at the various holes in the floor and ceiling. Yeah, he could believe that.
But then,
Roy continued, baring his fangs in a sneer,
I realized something. If you're alive, that means I can finally beat you one last time.
He stretched out his arm. There was a flash of purple light and his wand appeared in his hand. A larger wand decorated with spikes designed to fit his larger size.
I'm going to finally do something none of us managed to do. Not even Dad could kill Mario on his own. I'm gonna get the honor of ridding the world of the Mario Bros. Not Dad, not Junior, not Ludwig, but me.
By now Roy had reached the foot of the stairs. He towered over Luigi, more than twice his height. But Luigi did not budge. Luigi looked up, meeting Roy's gaze.
Roy! You and the Koopas have oppressed the entire world,
he said.
You.
His voice broke slightly.
You took Mario from me. I'm going to have to fight you, Roy.
Roy laughed, his voice echoing throughout the throne room.
You? Take on me.
Roy laughed.
Last time we fought, Luigi, I was only 18 years old. Now, I'm even more powerful than my dad. I've dedicated my entire life to becoming the #1 toughest, bulliest, completely unstoppable Koopa? What are you gonna do, little man? You gonna fix my leaks?
Luigi leapt up, until his face was level with Roy's. Then he spun around, smacking the Koopa in the head with his hammer. The force of the blow echoed through the room. Luigi's feet hit the floor. Roy stretched up a clawed hand and felt his face, before grinning.
Didn't feel a thing,
he said smugly.
Luigi, I'm going to enjoy this.
Roy spun around, catching Luigi off guard with his massive tail. Luigi was launched into the air, nearly losing his grip on his hammer. Still grinning, Roy brought back his fist and slammed it into Luigi's chest. Luigi cried out as he felt the force of 100 boulders slam into his chest and send him flying through a pillar into the wall. Every inch of his body felt as if it had been crushed, but Luigi forced himself to rise. Before he could make a single move, Roy slammed into him, smashing him through the wall. Human and Koopa crashed through the side of Neon City out into the night. All around them, fires were burning as bullet bills flew through the air, the forces of the Koopa Empire and Fire Flower locked in battle high up in the sky. Roy landed in the street, smashing the asphalt around him. He hurled Luigi at a building, but Luigi was ready this time. He spun his body around so that he hit the wall feet first, before wall jumping at it directly at Roy. Roy laughed and pointed his wand at Luigi, blasting a huge purple fireball at him. Luigi moved his body to the side, letting the fireball pass by him. He felt the heat of the blast scorch on his skin. Luigi, having slightly lost momentum, skidded to the ground. Not wasting any time, he picked up speed, dashing at the massive Koopa before him. Roy tightened his hand into a fist and swung up him, but Luigi leapt into the air, jumping off the fist and leaping towards one of the nearby walls. With a roar, Roy sent a massive purple blast spiraling in Luigi's direction. Luigi had anticipated that attack, however, and wall jumped towards the opposite skyscraper. Angrily, Roy launched another magic blast, but Luigi avoided in the same way, rapidly jumping from wall to wall as Roy launched blast after blast, the purple explosions lighting up the night. Luigi watched Roy's movements as he dodged. Right when Roy finished casting a spell, Luigi focused all his strength into his feet and shot like a rocket towards Roy. Roy glanced up at his and growled before taking a deep breath. Luigi's eyes widened. Oh no, he had forgotten that the Koopalings could do this too. Roy launched a fireball at Luigi. The humongous blast of flame caught him right into the chest, causing him to drop his hammer, and exploded. Luigi was flung into the air, pain flashing through his entire body. The explosion launched him high above the skyscrapers, where Luigi could see the battle going on in the sky. Roy leapt into the air and hit Luigi with another direct punch, knocking the wind out of his lungs. The punch launched Luigi across the city, his body flying over street after street until he finally skipped to a stop on one of the skyscraper roofs. Roy leapt down next to him, sending sharp shards of asphalt into Luigi's face.
Did you really think you could win?
Roy laughed, kicking Luigi into the air. He cried out and struggled to maintain conciseness.
Don't you know your time is over, old man?
Roy brought his fist down, slamming into Luigi's chest. The force of the blow sent Luigi rocketing back down to the streets, his body crashing into the asphalt and creating a crater.
There are no more Mario brothers!
Roy shouted as he landed next to Luigi, whose vision was fading. He couldn't think of anything, just pain.
Stop playing hero, green statue!
Roy sneered.
This is the end.
Roy picked up Luigi and hurled him with all his might. Luigi couldn't do anything to stop him. He felt his body slam into a building, the stone shattering around him. With the last bit of his pain, Luigi turned around to see Roy charging up another magic blast. The energy from the wand dyed the entire street purple as Roy focused more and more power. This blast would end the battle. It was over, Luigi thought as the pain flashed through his brain. He had failed. He had. Then Luigi remembered Mario. He thought of all the battles his brother had fought, all of the times he had gotten up after he had been beaten down. He thought of Princess Daisy's smiling face, and all of those happy, peaceful days in the Mushroom Kingdom. Roy's wand shone in his eyes, glowing like a purple sun. No. He wouldn't just give up here. Fighting against the pain, Luigi took a step forward. He curled his fingers into a fist. Electricity flickered around it. No. It was time to give it everything he had. Roy let loose his blast with such force, all the windows in the nearby buildings shattered. A purple beam of energy so large it filled the street blasted at Luigi like an evil comet. Luigi put his hands together, building up electricity. It had been so long since he had used the Thunder Hand technique, but his life was depending on him putting every ounce of his energy into this. As the blast hit, Luigi summoned around himself a protective barrier of electricity. The whole world around him turned purple as he struggled against the impossible force of Roy's magic blast. His entire body seemed ready to collapse as he strained to keep the barrier up. The two powerful forces of energy ate away at the stone around Luigi, building up a crater around him. Then, there was a flash, and Roy's attack gave up. Roy stood in the street, looking at Luigi in shock.
What?
He gasped. Luigi managed a grin. He felt as if Mario, Daisy, and all of his friends, from his longtime companions like Yoshi and Toad to his lesser-known ones like his partners from the Waffle Kingdom, were fighting alongside him.
It's a go time!
He exclaimed. Then Luigi ran at Roy, lighting trailing from his hands. Roy drew back his fist to hit him with another punch, but Luigi leapt over it, hitting Roy in the face with a lightning-powered kick. Roy screamed and went flying down the road, bouncing on the asphalt. Luigi ran after him, the sounds of explosions echoing in the background. Just as Roy recovered, Luigi built up power in his fist and hit Roy with an uppercut. There was an explosion of light that knocked out most of the neon signs nearby and launched Roy way up into the air. Luigi built up power for a super jump and leapt up to meet him, this time hitting Roy with another punch on the side of his shell that knocked him into one of the skyscrapers. The top floor of the building crumbled as Luigi landed on a skyscraper opposite it. With a roar of extreme rage, Roy burst out of the rubble, sending a storm of magic blasts at Luigi. Luigi leapt from skyscraper to skyscraper as the magic blasts crashed into the buildings, lighting them up with purple light like touches. Roy sent a fireball spinning at Luigi, but Luigi was ready. With another super jump, he leapt high into the air, far above Roy. Roy grit his teeth and hurled his wand into the air. With a puff of smoke, it transformed into a full-sized bonsai bill blaster with a special grip. Roy grabbed the cannon in his hands and fired. The huge missile launched at Luigi as Luigi focused lighting energy through his feet to launch himself like a rocket at Roy. Stretching his fist out, he cleaved through the bonsai bill, his entire body engulfed in a blue aura. For the first time that fight, Luigi saw on Roy Koopa's face an expression of fear. Then Luigi hit Roy. He smashed into him, crashing Roy through skyscraper after skyscraper in a diagonal crash towards the ground, both Koopa and human crashing through floors like a meteor. They burst through the last skyscraper and plowed into the road. Luigi unleashed all of his energy, shouting. There was a huge blue explosion around him. With the light finally cleared, Luigi was standing over Roy's body in a deep crater in the center of one of Neon City's streets. The crater was larger than the Toad Town Square and had taken out huge chunks from several of the buildings around it. Luigi's vision blurred as he stared at Roy's battered body lying below him.
Impossible!
The Koopaling grunted weakly. Luigi's body felt numb, like he was fighting to stop himself from passing out.
Don't mess with the Mario Bros,
he said, although most likely Roy did not hear him. Fires burnt around him and there was the smell of burning asphalt in the air. Above him, Luigi could hear the sound of propellers.
Great job out there, Mr. Luigi! Came a voice that he recognized as Koopaner's. The fight's won. Now let's get you out of here.
Luigi felt himself being lifted by hands and carried onto the airship. He heard the whirring of engines as the ship began to take off. He had actually done it. He had defeated Roy Koopa, someone who had oppressed thousands, if not millions of people, in the Sand Kingdom and beyond. He had taken out one of the Empire's leaders. Dealt a massive blow that even Bowser would feel. With the defeat of Roy, both sides in the Koopa Civil War would be forced to take action, and leave them both open to further attacks. This would be on the news. Everyone back home would see it. Daisy. Maybe she'd know he was alive. In spite of his injuries and pain that was so great he felt as if he were going to pass out, Luigi smiled. Yes. Everything was going to be all right now. Then he heard the words that made his blood run cold.
Drop the nuclear bomb!
Below Koopaner's airship, a secret hatch slowly moved open. A massive bomb, nearly as large as the airship itself, began to fall, its fuse lit. It was pure black with red, emotionless eyes. Neon City was burning. Several of the civilians had evacuated, of course, but there were still several who had yet to escape the city. Kupa troop soldiers worked to streamline the evacuations, while others hurried their injured comrades to the healing magic Kupas. None of them were aware of what was about to happen. It all happened very suddenly. There was a bright flash of light, and then an explosion of which the likes had never been seen before. A colossal, orange blast that seemed to light up the skies like fire and swallowing up entire skyscrapers. At the Fire Flower main headquarters, what seemed to be the entire organization was gathered in the control room, watching the fight from the huge main screen. When the explosion happened, everybody cheered, clapping their hands as if they had witnessed some performance. Yoshi watched the all-consuming light with a hard cold expression, the fire reflecting off his eyes.
Impossible!
Ludwig von Kupa said. He stood in his main control room, a huge chamber with multiple levels designed like a ballroom but filled with more advanced technology than nearly any other room in the world. He stood on his observation balcony with his arms crossed, watching the massive holographic screen showing the explosion. His technicians had stopped what they were doing, to gaze at the sight in horror. Ludwig gave a brief glance at Larry. Larry nodded, he understood what to do. Bowser Jr. stood with his siblings Morton, Iggy, and Lemmy, along with Grand General Sheldon and the rest of High Command, in the High Command Council room. They watched the holographic feed with wide eyes. The room was in silence. Everyone was lost for words. Emperor Bowser slouched on his throne, his eyes barely open as he watched the massive explosion in Neon City continue to grow.
Whatever.
He sighed apathetically. In a place hidden far away from the rest of the mushroom world, several people sat around a table in an oval-shaped room in which the walls were made up dozens of screens. Each of those screens showed the explosion, which caused the room to be bathed in a bright orange light. The light illuminated the crest on the table's center. 6 stars of different colors with one larger, orange star suspended above them. At the head of the table, a man seated on an ornate chair smiled. The heat was unbearable as Roy crawled out of the crater. The Koopaling knew that several of his bones were broken. But what was worse was his pride. Beaten by Luigi, after all the training he had done? Impossible. Roy reached the top of the crater. The massive explosion continued to expand, eating up skyscraper after skyscraper. It expanded with frightening speed. In a minute it would be upon him.
No!
Roy shouted out loud. The palm trees that lined the street burst into flame.
I won't die here!
He screamed.
Not here! Need a hand!
Came a familiar voice behind him. Roy frantically turned around to see Larry, standing on the other side of a glowing blue portal. Roy's heart sunk when he realized what situation he was in. Either he had to live his entire life owing a debt to Larry or he'd die right here, right now, humiliated.
Fine!
Roy exclaimed, diving headlong into the portal, which closed not a moment too soon. The light washed over the street, vaporizing it. It all happened in less than 3 minutes. Neon City, the jewel of the Koopa Empire, was gone. All that remained in its place was a massive crater in a tall, mushroom-shaped cloud that loomed above the desert, like a tombstone for the lives, hopes, and dreams that had been lost.